Hey friends, this is Sunday Postscript. I'm Pastor Cary. This is the Growing in the Gospel YouTube channel. And we had a great day at Emmanuel Baptist Church of Newington, Connecticut. And so what I do in this video is revisit the morning, Sunday morning, and tell you some highlights, go back through the message, maybe share a few thoughts that I didn't get to or that I want to clarify. And so that's what Sunday Postscript is. We won't be long today, but thank you for pressing play and thank you for stopping by and joining me and letting me speak into your life. Today was a great day for a number of reasons. I'm going to go backwards. So first of all, I just got back from stopping in to see all of our young adult singles in the Ignite group, and they're having a get together today. They were playing bingo when I walked in, but they had lunch, and it was this thing called Everybody's Birthday. So they were celebrating a big birthday party together as though they're celebrating everybody's birthday at one time. There's probably 60 people down there gathering, and I walked in just to say hi, and they hand me a microphone, and then they start throwing questions at me, and we had a good time visiting for a few minutes, talking about everything from favorite books to workout programs to what I think about left-handed people, which I am one, to eschatology and talking about prophecy and the upcoming Revelation study that starts in 2 weeks at Emmanuel. So it was a great time just to say hi to love those people, love their attitude, love their love for Jesus and their passion for him. Right before that, we enjoyed a lunch with a guest missionary, Tony Balawa and his wife, far north directors for Baptist International Missions. And before that, we finished 2 services at Emmanuel. I think my highlight of the day was leaving the first service and meeting a lady in the back middle who told me she trusted Jesus as her Savior today. She was there in tears with friends who had been sharing the gospel with her and praying for her for a long time. And today was her day to finally place her belief in Jesus Christ. And I'm telling you, those moments never get old. I know there were others in the service that trusted Christ. I'm sure there were, and maybe online, but to be able to meet this lady and her share her testimony briefly with me, with her friends, was just the highlight. And so I rejoice. I feel like I'm stumbling and fumbling my way through teaching the Bible and sharing the gospel, preaching the gospel, but to know that God blesses his word through flawed vessels is just never gets old. Today was also a great day because we finished the Gospel of John today. 20 months, verse by verse, section by section, through the Gospel of John. And today was our 64th message. And I will pretty soon probably go back and publish those sermons, that study, all the way through on Growing in the Gospel, so you can look forward to that. It was quite a journey, really looking God in the face through John's Gospel for 20 months. And so we're moving forward. In 2 weeks from today, we start our study of the book of Revelation, also written by the Apostle John. And what a great segue from John's Gospel into Revelation. So today was John 21, the recovery of Peter, verses 15 to 25. We covered the first half of the chapter 2 weeks ago, and now today, verses 15 to 25. I called the message, Loved Enough to Follow Forward, how we all take Peter's journey with Jesus. And so this was a time of disorientation for Peter, confusion. It led to disobedience because he and 6 other disciples have gone fishing against the admonition of Jesus, who said, hey, from now on, you're going to catch men. You're going to be fishers of men. They seem to have forgotten that. He told them to go to Galilee post-resurrection and wait for him, where he would meet them in a mountain there. And they were waiting, and 15 days in, no Jesus yet. And so Peter said, we're going fishing. I'm going fishing. And 6 others said, we're going with you. They really were reverting back to their old life. And it's so often the case when we struggle to follow Jesus, or we struggle to align ourselves with his script and what he's doing in our lives, we want to go backwards. We want to go back to our old selves, or we want to take control of things again, and that's a bad way to go about it. I shared with the church family this chapter is like an old friend to me because it has become a recalibrating, reset kind of chapter in my life so many times that gives me immediate clarity and simplification and prioritizing. Who am I? Where am I? Where am I going? What am I doing? And it really boils down to that question, do you love me? And I know the answer to a lot of complex things in my life is I love Jesus. I'm a follower of Jesus. And my call is to help others know him and love him and follow him too. And so that simplifies a myriad of problems and challenges, when it all is sanitized and siphoned down to the essence, I am a growing follower of Jesus Christ, and I love him, and I want to help other people love him. And when pastoring becomes very complex, and when aging becomes very complex, and when all the responsibilities of my life and call become very complex, John 21 makes it real simple. Do you love me? Follow me. Do you love me? Follow me. So we studied, first of all, that Jesus redeems me from failure. Here is Peter fishing with his friends all night, nothing. They catch nothing. Jesus comes early in the morning. As the sun is coming up, he builds a fire of coals. Reminds us of Peter denying Jesus at a fire of coals. He's cooking fish. Ironically, it's what the disciples are catching none of, and Jesus has plenty of it, and he's making breakfast. They've been fishing all night. They're disoriented, confused, displaced. They're disillusioned. They're now tired. They're exhausted from working. They're exhausted from catching nothing. They're hungry. They're exasperated. Meanwhile, Jesus is cooking fish on the seashore. So he calls out to them, have you caught anything? They say no. You know the story probably. He says, cast your net on the other side. He recreates their first call. They catch 153 fish, a net full. The net doesn't break. They drag the fish in. John looks at Peter and says, it's Jesus. Peter, in his moment of unthinking, exuberance, jumps into the water, swims to the shore. The disciples row the boat to shore and bring the fish ashore. Peter is now standing there, drenching wet and dripping with failure, frankly, before Jesus. And the story picks up where Jesus says, come and dine. Come and dine. What's he going to do? How's he going to respond to Peter in this moment of failure and disobedience? What does he do? Come and dine. So when they had dined, okay, that's where verse 15 picks up, and that's where we picked up today. And I brought out the fact that Jesus sometimes meets our physical needs and deals with our physiology, our need for rest, our need for nourishment, our need. And I'll just tell you, sometimes the world seems like it's falling apart, and it may be just that you need a physiological reset. You need rest. You need nourishment. You need health, physical health. And when you're not in physical health, everything else can be coming undone. And it can be dramatically affected by your physiology. Your whole mental, psychological, emotional, spiritual perspective on things can be radically impacted by the fact that you haven't slept enough, or that you need to eat and restore and recover, rest. So then he looks at Peter in this poignant moment of eye contact. The last time, or maybe one of the last times this happened, was in that courtyard at the Pharisees' home where they were trying Jesus, Caiaphas' house, and their eyes met. Peter denied Jesus 3 times, and their eyes met, and Peter went out and wept bitterly. And Jesus continued into the suffering of the cross and all the brutality of that. All of this unfolds in the shadow of the crucifixion and the resurrection, and that's really important to keep in mind. So then Jesus asks 3 questions in a row, to which Peter gives 3 affirmations in a row, to which Jesus gives 3 commissions in a row. The question is, do you love me? The affirmation is yes, but it's more tepid. It's a softer, Jesus is asking for this deep, devoted love, and Peter responds with a tepid, I do love you, and it's more of a, I like you, you're my friend, I love you. And I think Peter's conflicted because he wants to have deep love for Jesus, but he knows he doesn't yet. Why? Because he just denied him 3 times. So you've got this behavior that's witnessing against Peter, denial and disobedience. And then you've got this heart testimony of, I do love you, I want to love you, I know I should love you, but it's sure. So you have this behavior in contrast to belief. Peter believes he loves Jesus, but his behavior convicts him guilty of not loving Jesus. And you know what Jesus does, like he does with all of us in the gospel? He goes with his belief over his behavior. And at simple point, if you're trying to behave your way into salvation, you never will and never can. But you can believe your way. And God will take your profession of faith, and he will grant you salvation and forgiveness. And he will then, from the inside out, begin to deal with your behavior and work you and grow you through it. But it all begins with a profession, with belief, with a choice to believe. And Peter 3 times says, I do love you. And in response, Jesus accepts his belief. Against his behavior, he accepts, belief, the profession. And he says, feed my sheep, feed my lambs, feed my sheep. 3 times gives Peter purpose and a new commission, puts him back in the ministry, recovers him, affirms his belief, and receives him and forgives him fully. And this is what I mean by Jesus redeems me from failure. We talked about agape, phileo, storge, and eros kind of love. We talked about the origins of love and biblically what do these words mean, and the fact that the conversation written in Greek actually happened in Aramaic, and there's only one word for love in Aramaic. So we unfolded all these things that Jesus and Peter were not using 2 different words, agape and phileo. They were using one word, like English, love, and yet by John's recording of the story in Greek, he uses different words to help us understand that what Jesus was asking for in a deep, devoted love, Peter was responding with sort of a surface friend-like, brotherly love, and Jesus was calling him deeper and yet accepting his confession, and then gave him 3 commissions. I asked the question, why 3? Why 3 questions? Why does Jesus press 3 times? Well, I think, first of all, because he denied Jesus 3 times, and I think secondly, because it was Eastern or Near Eastern custom that something in a court of law with witnesses needed to be affirmed 3 times before it was ratified or solemnized into law in view of the witnesses. So Jesus is giving Peter a very legal way of reinstating himself as a leader among the apostles, that yes, I denied you, and yes, I failed you, but I do love you, I do love you, I do love you. And Jesus received that. We talked about love being the most sustainable driver of our Christian lives, that in all of our going and growing and doing and giving and serving, it needs to all flow from the love of Christ that constrains us and us saying, I love you too. I say to our church often, if we can't get there by loving Jesus, we don't want to get there any other way. In other words, of all the motivational tactics and tools that a pastor can use, I don't want to use any of them. I want our church family to love Jesus and live in worship and live in responsive love to his love. And so we give and we grow and we serve and we worship and we bless and we're faithful, not because we're earning love, but we live in love and from love and we love in return. So we're all saying, I love you too, Jesus. And it's awesome. The second thing we talked about was Jesus ordaining my future, and quickly moves into verse 18 where Jesus predicts Peter's death. And it sounds so negative. It says, when you're old, you're going to be stretched forth. That's crucifixion. Another will gird you and carry you whither you would not go. In other words, Peter, when you're young, you were able to go wherever you wanted to go. But when you're old, you're going to be led away and you're going to die by crucifixion for me. Sounds like a negative thing. Jesus is saying you're going to be crucified for me. But I'm going to tell you in a minute, it's totally positive, and you'll see that in a second. Then he says, follow me. As a result of this, he says, follow me. So what is the positive here? Well, it seems like Peter is losing all control of his life because Jesus says you can no longer go wherever you want to go or do whatever you want to do. So he's losing his autonomy. And then it says that you're going to be crucified. So he's losing any idea he would have of how he would die or how he'd end his life. What's the positive? The positive is Jesus is saying to Peter, you're going to live a long life. You're going to grow old. And not only are you going to grow old, you're going to grow old serving me. I'm going to use you for the rest of your life, Peter. I'm going to use you for a long time. You've got a long and faithful life to live for me. You've got a long and fruitful ministry to live for me. And then you're going to die by crucifixion. So it's an astounding promise. And by the way, it anchored Peter. You can go to Acts 12. You can find out that Herod had killed James, the brother of John. So you have these inner 3, Peter, James, and John. One of them's been killed. It would have rocked the church to the core. And then Peter is taken hostage by Herod. And Herod's so happy that the Jews are happy that they killed James. He's going to kill Peter tomorrow. He's going to bring him out on Easter and kill him in front of all the people and make everybody happy. The church is fervently praying. Peter's chained in prison between 2 guards. Late at night, he's going to die the next day. And what is Peter doing in Acts 12? He is sleeping. How can you sleep when you're on death row? You know you're going to die the next morning. Well, it's simple. Peter knew he wasn't going to die the next morning. So he just took a nap. He just went to sleep. He slept peaceably. Why? Because he had the promise of Jesus that he's not going to die until he's old. I can imagine him saying to those guards, I don't know how this is going to go down, guys. You guys think I'm going to die in the morning, that Herod's going to put me to death, but I can promise you I'm not dying tomorrow. And he went to sleep. It's awesome. And then you know the story. The angel came and released him, and the church didn't believe it when he came to the door, knocking on the door. But Jesus told him, you're not going to die young, you're going to die old. So history tells us that Peter did die a crucifixion death, and he asked in Rome to be crucified upside down because he didn't feel worthy to be crucified like Jesus was. Well, the next verse 20, when he's told he's going to die, he's going to be crucified, he turns and sees John, Peter does, looks at Jesus, and he says, what about that guy? What about him? And Jesus looks at Peter and says, what does it matter to you if I let him live until I come back? Follow thou me. And you know what Jesus is teaching us in this section? You don't have to live anybody else's life. We live in this world that's driven by comparison and envy and competitiveness, and we're happy with our lives until we see somebody else on social media that took a trip we didn't take, or bought a car we can't buy, or lives a life we're not living. And that person has children, and I want children. That person is married, and I want to be married. And that person, everybody has a better life than you do on social media, right? And we were happy with our kitchen and our bathroom until we picked up Better Homes and Gardens at the dentist office. And now all of a sudden we got to have that one, or till our friend got a new house or a better house, and suddenly we're not happy. It's a keep up with the Joneses mentality, and it's so oppressive. And it can creep into our vocational life, into our ministry life. Even as a pastor, I can look at the pastor pastoring a larger church than me, or that has a larger YouTube following than I do, or whatever. And I can compare my life to theirs, and I can come up short every time, and I can come up as the loser every time. But you know what Jesus says to me? Cary, you be Cary. You can only be Cary. And if you're not going to be Cary, if you're going to try to be somebody else, there's two things that are happening. Number one, you can't live somebody else's life, so you're not going to get that. And number two, while you're wanting that, comparing that, trying to live up to that, you're not living your story. You're not living the story that God's writing for you or that God's calling you to live. So it's a double loss. You don't get the story you want, and you don't get the story God's giving you either. You're missing both. And so, friend, let it go. Be you. You live your story. Don't compare yourself to other stories. Jesus is writing your story with you, in you, through you. Walk that road with him. He only tells you your story, okay? He only requires of you your story. You don't get to live, you don't have to live anybody else's story. I don't have to be any other pastor, any other preacher. I get to be me. And as small and insufficient as that seems, the more I'm okay with that, the more I can be joyful and liberated from all the false narratives and all the discontentment. It's just a good thing to be free from that. Well, John says from that moment forward, there was a rumor, there was gossip that Jesus told John he wouldn't have to die, which is not the truth. And it's so, this is where the rumor mill started in Christianity. It all started with the disciples. They got it wrong, and people have been getting it wrong ever since. It seems like I spent a lot of my time chasing down gossip and rumors and telling the true story. And so John sets the record straight. The last position of this was that Jesus continues his work. He redeems me from failure. He ordains my future, and he continues his work. And John finishes his gospel saying there are many other things which Jesus did that if they were written, not even the whole world could contain the books that it would be required to write all the things that Jesus is doing. And you know what I said to our church family? God's still writing your story. Jesus is still doing miracles. He's still doing amazing things, and he's still doing those things in your life and around your life if we trust him, if we follow him, and if we let him write our stories. You know how it all ended? Peter and John were so competitive all the way through their time with Jesus, but it all goes forward in a beautiful way. The story that Jesus writes. First of all, Peter and John work it out. They stop competing. They stop comparing. And when you read Acts 1 through 8, God uses them together. It keeps saying, in fact, 7 different times, Peter and John, Peter and John, Peter and John, Peter and John. They served together. They preached together. They healed together. They saw great victories together. They went to Samaria to see the revival in Samaria together, Peter and John. And then you know what happened? They became old. They lived to a very old age. And Peter wrote 2 other books, 1st and 2nd Peter, where he talked about suffering. And would you believe it? Peter wrote a book about humility. The guy that's the least humble all the way through ends up writing, humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So old Peter became a much more seasoned version of himself. And then John lived a much longer life, and he was a very aged apostle, and probably thought his ministry was coming to an end, and maybe his life was coming to an end. He was exiled by a Roman emperor to the island of Patmos in about 90-95 AD. the oldest and longest living apostle, and he had a very long and fruitful ministry, and he was a very faithful servant of God and pastor, primarily of the church of Ephesus. But he ends up at Patmos, where the emperor didn't want him to preach the gospel, and he probably didn't have very many opportunities to preach the gospel. Maybe a penal colony, maybe a couple of other small villages, very remote and remotely populated region. But John's on that island of Patmos, and something amazing happens. He's thinking maybe his life is winding down and his ministry's closing out, and he's written the books he's going to write, John, and then 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, about the love of God and our love for one another. But then Jesus shows up again. And Jesus says, John, you have one more book to write, so let's get busy. And we call that the book of Revelation. And we're going to start studying that as a church in 2 weeks from today, and I'm going to be airing those messages on Growing in the Gospel on this channel in a long-form teaching. And so I hope you will track along with us. And so we finished John's Gospel today, and it was good. It was good. It was a good 20-month, 64-message journey. And I'm so thankful for this last chapter of Peter's recovery. I'm so glad that God will recover me, Jesus will recover me, that he's scripting my future, and it's in good hands, and that his good work is still going forward in and through my life and all around me. And so that is Postscript for today. Thankful for a great day at Emmanuel, and I'm glad you would visit with me for these few minutes. So have a great day. We'll pick it up tomorrow with Growing in the Gospel, starting a new psalm. So we'll see you then.